Welcome to FO Talks. With me is our old friend and a very dear friend, Sebastian Schäfer. He is in Vienna. He's a German in Vienna. He heads the Institute of Central and Eastern Europe. He's a very knowledgeable chap. Without further ado, Sebastian, welcome.
Arturo, thank you for having me again.
Sebastian, you know Germany well, you know Austria well. You are from Germany, you live in Austria. Both these countries have been in the news recently. So paint us a picture of what is going on in both these countries, and then we'll dive deeper into each one.
Well, yeah, they are in the headlines, you're right, but probably not headlines you would want to see, because we've had in the beginning of September and then in the middle of September elections in three East German Länder, so on the sub-national level, where in those three countries the right-wing AfD, Alternative for Germany.
Very quickly, for those watching in the Anglo-Saxon world and are familiar with states within a country, state not as in the nation state, but states as, say, Texas, California, etc.
Exactly.
In the US, or for that matter, to take the Indian example, Gujarat or Uttar Pradesh or West Bengal, or to take the Australian example, Queensland. So Länder is the German equivalent of a state, and three states went to the polls in former East Germany. Sebastian will tell us the story in each one of these later. And each of these elected what in English we call AfD, Alliance für Deutschland, Alliance for Germany, a far-right party. Over to you, crack on.
So the Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, won in one of these states, in Thüringen, got the most votes in Thuringia, and in Brandenburg and in Saxony came second. What we've also seen there is a mixture of right-wing populists, but also coming from the former GDR party that is on the left side of the political spectrum, that was newly founded, who also surged in those elections, which makes it very complicated, because there is almost no possibility for the traditional democratic parties to form a government without any of those two. And so
so very quickly, this new party is quite far left. It is headed by a lady who apparently is quite charismatic. And so you have the far right and the far left that have surged. And now to form a government, you need either of them. You can't do without one of them.
I would say, like, when you look at this Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, she comes from a far left party. She left the far left to form her own party, but she also uses certain narratives that overlap with the Alternative for Germany.
Interesting. So it's almost like a horseshoe in the sense that the far left and the far right, they are not a straight line. They're not a spectrum. They're basically a horseshoe. Some of their policies converge. They are close by.
They do. I have to say, I'm not entirely convinced by this horseshoe theory
analogy
in a political party spectrum, especially because if you look at the results, of course, they are vastly different. With the AfD, we see 30%, so they take in Thüringen, for instance, they take a third of the mandates, which gives them certain powers, because you need, for instance, 2/3 majorities to elect people in the constitutional court of that state, which means you will have to negotiate with them. And they already said that they will try to influence this, for instance. The Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht is a bit less successful. Plus, it's also not a classical far-left party, because it uses some nationalist and also anti-migration foreigners rhetoric
Mhm.
So there's, I think she found a very peculiar niche that resonates, especially
Mhm.
also in the former East German
GDR, German Democratic Republic. Remind us, what is the name?
Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht. So it's named after her at the moment. She was a very prominent figure in the left party. The left
Mhm.
party in Thüringen, for instance, was in government.
Mhm.
They had the prime minister, which was not very traditionally far left in his policies. He has gotten quite a good reputation, I would say. He is also not a traditional far left. The former left party that derived out of the GDR is, of course, traditionally very Russia friendly. But
I
he
see.
did not have this, we need to seek peace, and both sides are have their faults in that war of aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, or Sarah Wagenknecht herself, she is on the forefront of spinning Kremlin narratives up to a point where we could imagine, why is she doing this voluntarily? And here is also the overlap to a certain extent what was happening in Austria.
But hold fire, hold fire, hold fire. So this happens in September. We'll come to
Yeah,
Austria. That has happened more recently. So
yeah,
this happened in Germany, three states. They get the highest number of seats in Thüringen. They come a close second to CDU, Christian Democratic Union, the dominant party, or hitherto dominant party, which was led by Angela Merkel, and before that Helmut Kohl. And this shakes up the political establishment of Germany. And when I was in Germany, when I was in Munich for a wedding recently, they had closed the borders. They announced they were closing borders,
yeah,
and you could not enter as a foreigner. Um, and that is new. That is, in a way, uh, a great step back from Schengen, wherein if you entered, today I'm in France, if you entered France, then you could go anywhere.
yeah,
So there have been changes already. So explain that
yeah.
change a little bit. What is the rise of the AfD doing to German politics? Because it seems the center of gravity is shifting right.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, you mentioned it's against Schengen. Yeah. So this is violating EU law. This
Mm,
is something that a nation state within the European Union will not be able to uphold. But the
mm,
Schengen system itself has been under pressure for quite some time, for a
mhm,
decade. With the so-called migration crisis, there has been a suspension of Schengen and a reintroduction of border controls done by several countries,
mhm.
amongst them also, for instance, neighboring countries of Germany, here Austria, but also, for instance, Denmark. Um,
I see.
what Germany is now doing, and you can find reasons to do that, and there are exceptions, but they're limited to 30 days. Fun
I
fact
see.
on the side, the normal, so to say, reason for a suspension in the past, since the start of Schengen in 1993, was either football
Mm,
or the G meetings. Yeah? So when there was a football World Cup or a European Championship, there were border controls reintroduced to prevent hooligans from entering the country.
mhm.
And if there was a G7, G8, G20 meeting somewhere within the European Union, they reintroduced temporarily border controls to counter possible demonstrations, etc. But now,
This time it happened after a stabbing, apparently by an Islamist radical. So this time, apparently, the trigger was a fear of such radical fundamentalists coming into Germany and causing violence.
yeah, but you're not going to to stop that through
mm,
this, and we all know that. So it's a political decision, a signal, which I find very dangerous, because if you are driven by these narratives that are spun from far-right parties,
mhm,
then of course this Schengen system is not gonna survive.
mhm,
The overall challenge here is twofold, I would say, because first of all, the Schengen outside border is nowhere in Germany.
mhm,
So what we need to do is to have a trust and a functioning Schengen outside border control. But if there
mm,
are countries that let people in and then pass through, of course, this makes certain countries uneasy. And the second thing is we need to have a better joint effort on, first of all, redistribution of migrants within the European Union, and second of all, joint efforts of integration. And this is how you prevent this, because if you want, if someone wants to do this, you are not going to stop him with border controls, because where are those stabbings coming from? These are people that are recruited, radicalized online and or offline in mosques, in associations that are
in Germany,
associated
that are
with
already in Germany.
in Germany, yeah.
Mhm.
And in general, you will not prevent this type of stabbings by closing the border. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to, okay, this happened in Germany, and Germany closed its borders, and then there were elections in Austria,
Yeah.
and the far right party has won. So what is going on in Austria? Paint us a picture there.
So in Austria, uh, the end of September, we had the federal parliament elections, and for the first time in the history of the Second Republic since 1945, the far-right Freedom Party has won the most votes in a federal election.
Mm,
And, they have close to 30%.
mm,
I think they ended up by 29, 80, 28 point something percent,
mm,
outpacing the conservative ÖVP, who also had the chancellor. And it's a situation where we see a lead candidate of this Freedom Party that currently all other parties that made it into the parliament say we won't go into a coalition with him.
mhm.
But at the same time, of
So a
course,
little bit like France in a way, in a bit like Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen,
yeah.
which did win in the first round, but then voters all voted in a way to prevent it from winning a national majority. And of course, other parties have collaborated to keep her party out of power.
Mhm. So this is currently the situation.
Mm.
What I find, I mean, we see a rise of far-right parties throughout Europe. You've mentioned France, but there is also, of course, other countries where we
Hungary, Slovakia, we could
well, you
go
can
on.
debate here again in Slovakia if this is like really far right, but this is at least sharing certain
Mm.
narrative, and
Mhm.
of course being very
Yeah.
populist. But yes, so I mean, still we had a change in government in Poland, but the Peace Party won the most votes in the
Mm.
at least in the overall parliamentary elections for the same.
Mm.
You see that also in the Scandinavian countries. You see that in Italy. You see it in
Mm.
Spain. Not all the time.
Not
They
in Spain,
and
not in Spain, to be fair. In Spain, the centrist parties have done rather well in the last election. The extreme parties, the populist parties, both of the right and left suffered.
it's true that they don't have the most votes in Spain, but still, if you look at the history of the country, that a
General Franco in charge
yeah, and
until the 70s, very recently,
yeah, and
73.
you look at the Vox Party, which is polling very high. You have another right-wing party that even made it into the European Parliament
Mhm.
in the elections. You have also you see them being very organized with each other, yeah,
Mm,
on a European scale.
mm,
Which is ironic in a sense, because I mean they make most of the time they advocate for policies that would be aimed also against citizens of other countries, because in
yeah.
general they
So,
are
just to explain, we are talking about collaboration between far right parties of different countries. So,
yes,
although they are nationalists, although they
yeah,
say we want, say, Spain for the Spanish or
yeah.
Germany for the Germans and Austria for Austrians, although they may have slogans like that, when it comes to Brussels, when it comes to the European stage, these far right parties are nimble enough and indeed political enough to collaborate, to form alliances, to have tactical voting, and so on and so forth.
And I think also learning from each other how to be successful.
Mm,
Something that, for instance, I think the far left and also the center left parties throughout Europe are not managing to pull off. Yeah?
mm,
Um,
mm.
Conservative parties to a certain extent, but the far right is very well organized, dominating the discourse in social media. It's appalling if you look at numbers, for instance, that young voters, new voters in the three East German states, they have predominantly voted for the Alternative for Germany. And this
Yeah,
is something that is not the usual narrative that we could see in rise of far right parties.
yeah,
They say, yeah, well, it's these older, frustrated, uneducated men in the end. No, this is no longer the case. They go through spectrums. You still see certain differences, but they have the highest vote share among new and young voters, and this is a worrisome development. And some of the explanations for it is certainly that they are amazingly well organized on social media, especially TikTok.
mm,
Anyway, back to Austria, maybe briefly to finalize this, because what was appalling for me is that if we remember 5 years ago, there was a video surfacing that was shot uh, even further ago on Ibiza, where we saw then member of the Freedom Party, not yet in government, but at the time when the video was published, the vice chancellor in a coalition in Austria, and he was in that video fantasizing about buying a Austrian newspaper with the help of a Russian oligarch that was pretending to be very wealthy in that video, to gain influence and to become the strongest party in Austria. That led to the end of the government, that led to
indeed.
the
That was a major scandal.
it was a major scandal. The Freedom Party lost majorly in the then snap election, was no longer in government, had around, I think, 15%, and now doubled themselves without needing to buy the
The
newspaper, without
newspaper.
needing the support. Because one of the things, of course, is the overall the overall political, so to say, mood that shifts towards right and far right parties in Europe. But on the other hand, what they have perfected is not only social media, but a parallel media enterprises that where they can dominate the discourse, and they don't need traditional media anymore. And so they have their own TV channel. They have conspiracy-driven channels that are spinning their narratives. And so it's very hard to traditionally counter them on a debate stage because they don't have to show up.
Understood. Now that is certainly true, but what is also true is that democracies around the world are facing problems as well: rising inequality, um, persistent wage stagnation, cost of living crisis. And because there is discontent, because you already have dry grass, um, it is easier to set off a forest fire. So,
Absolutely.
whilst, yes, the narratives of the far right or even the far left may be relying on slander and fake news and uh, seductive TikTok videos that are simplistic, sensational, and untrue. But it's also true that people are feeling pain. After all, in the US, which is where I am normally based when I'm not uh, traveling like a madman in the US, um, you look at the numbers, and the numbers were shocking. Apparently, 60%, or I don't remember the exact figure, please forgive me, but certainly much more than 50%, perhaps more than 60% Americans didn't have $500 in cash to meet an emergency
Mm.
expense. And we know that healthcare in the US costs 20%, nearly 20, 17, 18 maybe percent of the GDP. It is incredibly expensive. You show up uh, for an emergency visit and they take an x-ray and they slap you with $2,500. You send your child to a kindergarten in the US, that costs an arm and a leg. In fact, such is the cost of living crisis, with housing costs, i.e. rent, with childcare, with healthcare, with the cost of education. Where going to Harvard can easily cost $300,000 for 4 years of your child's education. So, and even a state university has become more expensive. That people really want to give a kick um, to the backside of professional politicians. So that is also true. I don't know what are the specifics in Austria and Germany, but
Mm.
it seems to be that in Germany, the perilous state of the economy uh, must contribute, and in East Germany, the persistent low employment must contribute to this sort of problem. In Austria, yeah, I do not have deep knowledge as to what is contributing, what are
Mm.
the underlying
Yeah.
conditions that are leading to this. So please explain the particulars of both countries, sir.
Yeah. I completely agree with everything that you have mentioned. But the challenge that I see here is that while yes, there are no good um, offers in a sense to alleviate all these things that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
um, the the promises that are coming from these far right parties is
Mm,
basically uh, foreigners. Foreigners are to blame.
got
And
it.
if we don't have foreigners, then we will have enough housing, we'll have enough jobs, we'll have a super stable economy. And of course, this is all not true. And we know that. Yeah? And we should have been
Europe is
past that.
aging.
Yeah,
Europe is aging.
exactly.
If
Yeah,
nothing else, you need
exactly.
carers for old people.
So, and I mean, nothing would work. Nothing would work if you really close the border and don't let foreigners in anymore. Not only in Europe, the same in the US. But
But
the
hold fire. That is true. But then you also need, and this is the devil lies in the details, you also need an intelligent labor policy, because
yeah.
you can get immigrants as you get in France, where I'm sitting, where many of them end up in banlieues. They do not work. they are chronically unemployed. In fact, France has had over 10% unemployment since 1980. And that leads to discontent, partly because of racism, partly because of police brutality, but also partly because many of them turn to the mosque and they are in banlieues and they are under the influence of um, unsavory characters. And then you get a very incendiary situation that leads to riots.
Yeah.
So just bringing people in is not the solution. I think bringing
No.
the right sort of people in is has to be part of the labor and immigration policy.
Yeah, and also use this as an opportunity. I'm baffled that after
Mm,
so many, I mean, it's decades, but I mean, the last decade especially with
mhm,
migration coming from the Middle East and from Northern Africa, where this seems to be a particular challenge for certain parts of societies that are then exploited by
mm.
far-right populist politicians. But why is there not any party that comes and says like, hey, this is the situation. We need to do something. It's obvious. Everybody knows that. Yeah. And I mean, it's clear that we cannot deny that there is a problem,
Mm.
but we need to deal with this. And tackling it doesn't mean we close borders and we shut our eyes before the situation that is there.
So just to break it down, at the moment there is an assimilation problem, and there are uh, race, to use an Anglo-Saxon term, race relations problems. So the way forward perhaps is better assimilation, and the way forward perhaps is immigrations that is skills based or more intelligent. So you need old age carers, fine, you get them, carers for old age homes, you need plumbers, you get them. So have immigration that is uh, more driven by the needs of the economy than just at the moment as it is.
But why do we not use and educate plumbers? Huh?
That's
So,
also a good question.
I
Yeah.
mean, well, I don't know if you would be more successful if you say, okay, you have a certain point system, and if you have a education that serves the purpose, then you will have the opportunity, and
That's
it's a
the Canadian and
nightmare.
Australian
You,
system, by the way, that
yeah,
has proved
yeah.
very successful.
And I mean, have you tried to like get your certificates acknowledged if you're not from an EU
Mm.
country? That's a nightmare. Yeah. And then
Mm,
you might be needed in one country, but only speak the language of another country.
mm.
No, what we would need to do is to make a
It's
better
complicated.
assessment.
What you're saying is, given the different languages and given the different needs of various EU countries, having a point system is difficult because it's not Australia, it's not Canada.
Yeah, and then I mean, what we need is a joint effort on a
Mm,
ideally European, but more practical on a EU basis,
mm,
where you look for certain possibilities, needs, demands, etc., create the necessary conditions,
mm,
offer the possible education and the possible integration. Because I mean, we have situations where there are asylum seekers that are waiting, that are not allowed to work because they simply don't get the permit. They don't have the possibility.
mm.
They start education once they are at a certain point, and then at the end of the education, we have had situations where they have been sent back to their country.
Mm.
And this is a lot
And by the way,
of human
just to
capital.
stop you, by the way, this education was subsidized by the taxpayer.
Of course, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
And so if we would make smarter decisions in this case, and if we would not, and you see this, yeah, that parties are running after far right populist slogans, parties that are on the center right and on the center left,
Got it.
and
So,
I
so
don't
they're
understand.
they are adopting the clothes
Yeah,
of the more extreme
yeah.
parties.
But we have a saying in Austria. you don't you go to the Schmied and not the Schmiedel, yeah? You go to the one who has done that for decades, yeah? Who has promised to get rid of the foreigners for decades. You don't go to that person who just recently started it, yeah? Or if
Yeah.
you want to stick with
Mhm.
this, you don't go to the apprentice. You go to
To the
the one,
master.
yeah. Huh? And so I don't know why they are running around these slogans. Yeah, closing the borders now because the AfD one is the wrong point. The better point would be to say we need to find a possibility to deal with the obvious challenges that we are having here. And if we do not have enough parties supporting that, so we can actually do that properly, then this is going to be very difficult. And right-wing parties are banking on this. They don't want solutions because they're elected because of not having solutions, but promising the state of milk and honey, and people fall for it.
So,
It's
so they're
frustrating.
like Pied Pipers,
Yeah,
and they are
yeah,
offering simple solutions to
yeah,
complex problems. Now,
yeah.
the question I have for you is, uh, what are traditional parties doing, and what have they done in the past? Where have they gone wrong? Because clearly they have gone wrong, and they're not being able to respond to the challenges. For instance, we know in France that the traditional center-right parties have been wiped out.
Mm,
They don't exist pretty
mhm,
much, even though the new prime minister, Michel Barnier, is from that center right. But really,
yeah,
he's there because of Emmanuel Macron, President Emmanuel Macron, inviting him to
yeah.
become prime minister. Uh, but a lot of places, traditional parties are taking a hammering. Is it because they are led by professional politicians who don't really have understanding of the common people? Is it because of the proportional representation system? They've become very centralized and it's party lists. You don't have an individual relationship between the member of parliament and local constituents. What has gone wrong with these traditional parties?
It's you, I would say on the one hand, you would need to look at
Hmm.
country specifics because you already mentioned
Yes,
there's
different
different
countries, different systems in
electoral
Europe. Yeah,
systems,
true.
etc.
Yeah.
But
But there is proportional representation in
yeah,
most of them. For instance,
yeah,
Netherlands has it, Germany has it,
yeah.
France doesn't quite have it. It has a strange hybrid, very French system, but a lot of other European countries have this proportional representation system. Austria has it.
You find certain patterns, huh?
Mm.
And I would say on the one hand, a very challenging part is, of course, that what I mentioned, that there is a problem that arises from migration.
Mm.
That on the one hand, the center-left parties ignored.
Mm.
Their solution was basically it'll sort itself out if we just
Yeah,
remain open and try to stay a integrative
yeah,
society that is sort of permissible, which
yeah.
of course we
Actually, and
knew it never
yeah,
has been.
exactly. An older CDU politician told me in confidence, of course, in a private conversation, that when they were younger, they thought that immigrants would come, they would naturally assimilate, they would get jobs, they would watch football, they would drink beer, and they'd become good Germans.
Mm.
Um, and he said that looking back 20 years or 25 years, he said, when you know he was in the peak of his power, uh, he would change that assumption because it's not as simple as that.
At the same time, I would also say that, for instance, especially conservative parties and also here, CDU, CSU in Germany,
Mhm.
they even had a different assumption in the very beginning, because they
Mm,
thought these foreigners will come, they will
mm.
help us rebuild, and then they will go home, and then they
Oh,
stay.
that was the
Yeah.
gastarbeiter. That's 50s and
Yeah.
60s. Correct. Yes.
But still,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
the very assumption to
Yeah.
today in certain parts of these center-right parties is, well, look, yeah, it's okay if they come, if it's okay if they take out our trash and take care of our elderlies, but please don't bother us with more. Yeah. And here
Mhm,
you go. This is the two things, like the being ingrained um anti-integration
mhm,
opportunity creating, and on the
mhm,
other hand saying like, there's no problem, it'll sort themselves out. We just have to stay open, and maybe we also need to adapt more, and etc.
mhm,
Leads to this situation that we have now. And this is being exploited by far-right populists, that their only reason for doing that is for themselves to be part of that system and benefit from it. And if you look, for instance, at Austria, where the Freedom Party has managed to sort of brand themselves as an anti-systemic party, something that the AfD in Germany is perfecting as well.
mhm,
They've learned very much from the
mhm.
Freedom Party.
Yeah.
But the
They are the
FPÖ,
anti-status quo. They are the anti-system. They are the people who will bring
yeah,
in a political revolution,
yeah,
change.
but from all the head of the parties that are in
Yeah.
parliament, the one from the FPÖ is the most benefiting from the political system, because
Mm,
he has been in not the position as party head, but within the party. He's done nothing else than being in the Freedom Party.
mm.
And this is
No
very,
profession.
very interesting to see how you're able to not provide solutions, but
Mm,
to perpetuate a problem, um, branding yourself as anti-systemic while being the most systemic person that you could imagine,
mhm,
and then getting the most votes out of that.
mhm,
And this is something that ultimately is very worrisome, for the simple fact that it changes something in a society and in the political system. And I have had conversations where I was told, look, yeah, you won't have a problem because you're German. Yeah. And I say, well, what's the difference? I'm also then a foreigner. Yeah. If you talk about this remigration, etc., I'm a foreigner. I'm not an Austrian. Yeah, but you could be. Yeah. It's like, yeah, but where do you think that it stops there? And then they say,
yeah,
look, you won't have a problem. You just have to see how you position yourself towards these
mm,
people. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a director of an independent regional think tank.
mm,
And if I now have to pay attention to, if I say anything in a conversation like what we have, that could be dangerous for me, either as a person or as in my professional life, this is the start of it. Yeah. And then you do some self-censorship, and then they come for, first they come for this minority, then they come for the people who believe this and that, and then ultimately they'll also come for you. And this is
yeah.
what the
Well,
people don't understand.
yeah, this is, of course,
When I
the
discuss it.
argument of Nazi Germany. First, they came for
Yeah, the
the
Jews.
Jews,
Yeah.
then they came for the communists, then,
Yes,
and so on and
exactly,
so forth, and
exactly.
ultimately they came for me. But
Yeah.
let me ask you my final question.
Hmm.
How serious is the threat? Do you think they'll take over the levers of power as in the 1930s, or will this tide reach a high point and recede? And also, if they do get into power, like Giorgia Meloni, do you think power will temper them? Over to you, sir.
So, to a certain extent, one of the more optimistic takes
Mm,
is that anytime these parties have been in government,
mm,
they at a certain point destroyed themselves,
mm,
and the government collapsed. But they always sort of come back. And what I find very dangerous in the situation right now in Austria, for instance, is that you have a situation where there is someone who is not this charismatic person that brings those people. Yeah? That where we think about Jörg Haider or when we think about HC Strache, they were not necessarily anti-democratic. They were anti-foreign, anti-whatever populists, but also very charismatic in their behavior. But not
Yeah,
with,
I remember Jörg Haider. My God, he was charismatic.
but not necessarily with the agenda to wipe out the political system. What I see and where I see a great danger at the moment is Herbert Kickl, who is the leader of the FPÖ. He has been Minister of the Interior during the brief period before the Ibiza video surfaced. In that time already, there has been considerable damage done to the intelligence service in Austria. Just ask other intelligence services in Europe how they are cooperating with Austria
Well,
since.
they tell me that Vienna is crawling with spies and is infiltrated by Russians.
Well, that was also before Herbert Kickl. that's, that's, that's a different story. We might have to do another FO talk. But
It's another episode. Vienna, the city of spies.
yes, yes. But the danger that I see is Herbert Kickl knows the system like no other because he has been part of it, as I mentioned, for decades. He has been Minister of the Interior. And my fear is, and you could see this in Hungary, for instance, Viktor Orban was in power. He was voted out. And when he came back, he made sure that you can't get rid of him anymore. Robert Fico was out in power in Slovakia. He was voted out. And now he's back. And see how quickly he changes institutions and the political landscape in Slovakia. My fear
So
is
Fico and Orban could be models for Austria.
oh, they openly admire the Orban system in the Freedom Party. Herbert Kickl is a huge fan of Viktor Orban. And so here is the thing. He comes back, he has the experience, he has the anti-systemic stance. I am afraid that he will try to dismantle the rule of law in Austria. And that is something, if you have the knowledge, if you have the majority that you can form a coalition and get into certain positions of power, this is so much more dangerous than a charismatic leader of a party, because that guy either drives a car or drinks Red Bull in a finca in Ibiza, and then you're rid of him. You will not get rid of a Herbert Kickl that is ingrained in the system and can exploit it. And
So,
just
so to use a Soviet metaphor, Leon Trotsky, extremely charismatic, great commissar of the Red Army. In fact, in many ways, you could argue he won the Civil War for the Soviets. He was a brilliant propagandist, general, speaker, orator, all that jazz. Um, and Joseph Stalin was a plotter. He was like a schemer in a medieval court who ultimately killed everyone. And Soviet Union couldn't get rid of him. In fact, despite Beria, despite the extraordinarily poor decisions in the early part of World War II, he still died on his deathbed. No one even dared to launch a coup against him or to send him off to his deathbed. And he expected it. So what you're saying is that Austria now has a plotter and a schemer who's quite dangerous, like Viktor Orban of Hungary, like Robert Fico of Slovakia. The question is, how close is he to power? And can we breathe easy for now until the next election? Or is Austria already slipping into that orbit?
So what we're seeing at the moment, when all the other parties say they don't want to they don't want to be in a coalition with him, for very good reasons.
Mhm.
Some of them that I mentioned, there's more to that actually, but um, there is of course a discussion if they now form a coalition against him,
Mhm.
that this might only help him to be even more to get more votes afterwards.
Next time, because this coalition that comes to power will have lots of contradictions. They have been voted by different interest groups, different sets of voters with contradictory priorities and wants and needs. And
Yeah,
so eventually it'll fall apart. And then the Freedom Party can say, look, we are the only one that
yeah,
are capable of sorting the system
exactly. And
or
so
reforming the system,
there
of
are
changing the
voices.
system, or overthrowing the system, whatever the
Yeah,
narrative is.
exactly. But so there are voices within the Conservative Party to say, like, let's go into a coalition and let them show that they need to do something, and then they can't do something, and then we win some voters of them
Hmm. Hmm.
back. The challenge that we see at the moment is that they will not have the possibility to have the chancellor. So when the ÖVP at the moment and the current still acting chancellor Karl Nehammer said, I will not go into a coalition with Herbert Kickl, that means that he would have to step down or be receiving a vote of no confidence from his party. I
Hmm.
don't see anything like that at the moment happening because he just received a vote of confidence in from
Hmm.
the party earlier this week. But um, I think in one of our last interviews, you said that in politics, like a week is like a lifetime or something.
A long
And
time a week is a long time in politics. I didn't
yeah,
say that. I think it was Anthony Eden who said it. A week is a long time in politics because
yeah,
he, of course, had the 1956
yeah,
misadventure in Egypt, and that
yeah.
destroyed him.
Yeah. And so we might see, for instance, negotiations for a coalition of three parties against the Freedom Party collapsing by the end of the year, and then something needs to happen, and then maybe also people need to go. So I don't hope that this comes. I'm very much hoping that the Chancellor Nehammer will remain chancellor and is able
Mhm.
to form a coalition here. And then the thing is, and this is one of the things that I've mentioned before, then within this coalition, they need to sit down and provide solutions to the challenges that are out there.
Mhm.
Because then if they do that and not try to manipulate and to not have common successes, I believe, yes, the Freedom Party will rise. But if they tackle challenges, then they certainly will have a possibility to um, to bring down and win back certain of the voters, because I see it as too dangerous to say, let's try to get them into government and then hope that a new video surfaces or a new scandal erupts or a new whatever, because ultimately this also costs us, the taxpayers, a lot of money. I almost would have said a bad word because we're approaching later at night, but it
Well,
really costs massive amount of taxpayers' money that we've seen in the past, and we should be wiser, and we have much more challenges than just sticking to the old. If we don't have foreigners, then everything will be fine.
all right. So the coalition has to come up with real solutions to real problems. On that note, uh, thank you very much. We publish voices from around the world. Our friend Sebastian is our voice from Vienna. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for our newsletter on our website, and we've launched a massive fundraising campaign. We are asking people to support us for as little as $11 a year. And that is because we don't have owners, we don't have advertisers, we are a non-profit, we do not have a paywall, we are open access for anyone, anywhere in the world. And so on that note, thank you very much, Sebastian. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, likewise, and continue with the good work.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.